Okay, so I'm just going to preface by saying that I'm standing up right now because my ass hurts. So maybe I'll start doing reading books this way, right? Chapter 13. Slaughter. Tex and I have been secretly snorting, or inhaling, methadone, crystal speed for 3 or 4 days. In violation of the unspoken family code, we had kept our own private stash and were using it constantly. I had become fond of Tex. He was a tall, string bean, bony Texan with beautiful blue eyes. Suave and at the same time very gentle, he was demonstrably grateful for favors and kindness, unlike many of the men at Spawn's. He was important to life at the ranch because of his mechanical ability. He knew how to maintain machinery and had an uncanny ability to repair just about anything. To Charlie, he was valuable in maintaining our motor vehicles and especially in building and caring for dune buggies. This gave him an independence and high standing among the men at the ranch, especially Charlie. He was also popular with women, but seemed to prefer only one at a time. It is unclear now, but this high standing probably was the reason why we felt we could get away with keeping our stash. At any rate, Tex was as sold out to drugs as I was. He had an unusual way, for example, of maximizing the effect when he was tripping out. He would shake his head violently back and forth, his hair whipping and whirling. Then he would hold his head perfectly still, while his eyes rolled and a strange, inhuman noise came from his mouth. He would become stoned beyond belief. Tex and I, both stoned, were lounging around the boardwalk on the movie set with 7 or 8 others on the sweltering night of August 8th, 1969. It was Friday night. Charlie walked up and called 4 of us aside. Tex, Pat, Linda, and myself. He spoke to each of us together, yet separately. Get a change of clothes and your knife and go with Tex. Do whatever he says to do. I knew inside we were going out to kill someone. I hesitated. But Charlie looked at me. I want you to go. When I returned with my things, Charlie and Tex were talking. I was unable to hear what they were saying. Tex was apparently the only one who knew where we were going. I climbed into the front seat of the old Ford alongside Tex. Linda was the only one with a valid driver's license, but Tex did the driving. We were both stoned, but our senses were keen. We were alert. We knew what we were doing. We didn't know who lived there, but we were going to a house Tex had been in before. Formerly the home of Terry Melcher, Doris Day's son. We were going to take all the money we could find and kill everybody there. We were racing out of control. We looked at the fence at 10,050 Cielo Drive. With a pair of wire cutters bought from the ranch, Tex had cut the telephone wires leading into the house before we parked the car at the bottom of the hill. Cielo Drive is a narrow street winding up sharply from Benedict Canyon Drive, a major thoroughfare running northwest off Sunset Boulevard and Beverly Hills out into Bel Air. It is breathtakingly rugged and luxurious in area, secluded and quiet. Suddenly, that whole section, number 10,050, was cut out of the world and lifted up into another existence. We were separated from the whole world. Perhaps for the first time in my life, I was deeply aware of evil. I was evil. But the four of us, darkly dressed, I in black jeans and a long-sleeve black shirt and barefoot, didn't stop. Avoiding the high metal gate, we picked a spot in the fence and climbed over one at a time. As I reached the top, the hot air of the 90-degree night smothered me. I looked around in a fraction of a second. It was crazy. Some multicolored outside Christmas lights were still up along a wall, and they were lighted. I dropped down into a bed of ivy and fell to my hands and knees. Together we began moving up the hill toward the house, keeping low and quiet. The house was about 100 feet away. Suddenly, headlights flashed across the yard. A car was coming down the driveway. "Get down," Tex whispered sharply. "Stay here." I flattened myself on the grass, and the sour taste of panic rose in my throat. Tex disappeared into the darkness, and in a moment I heard his voice. "Halt." Silence. Then a different voice sounded in the night. "Please don't hurt me. I won't say anything." Then came 4 gunshots in quick succession. Tex returned immediately and motioned us forward. When we reached the car, a white Rambler, I saw a young man, Stephen Parent, who had been visiting the caretaker, William Garretson, in the guest house at the rear of the property, slumped in the seat. Tex reached inside the car and turned off the lights. The 4 of us pushed it back up the driveway to the garage area to the right and rear of the main house. We went to the house, and 3 of us waited at a window next to the front while Tex disappeared around the back. In a few minutes, he opened the window, and Pat and I went inside. Linda remained outside to watch, quiet in our bare feet. We went into the living room. At first, it seemed unoccupied, but we saw a man asleep on a couch. Pat and I moved around the couch, and Tex, a long .22 caliber revolver in one hand and a knife in the other, stood in front. A coil of rope was slung over his shoulder. Pointing the gun at the man's head, he said sharply, but not loudly, "Wake up." The man, whom we determined later to be Wojtek Frykowski, a playboy of Polish background, opened his eyes, understandably startled. "Who are you?" he blurted. "What do you want?" Tex then, very matter-of-factly, uttered the words that still echo in my mind. "I'm the devil, and I'm here to do the devil's business." Still holding the gun on the man, Tex told me to get something to tie his hands. He obviously had other uses for the rope still coiled over his shoulder. I looked all over the living room and went into several others. All I could find was a towel. I grabbed it and rushed back. Tex looked at me rather exasperatedly and told me to tie the man's hands. I did the best I could with the towel, but I knew it wasn't very secure. Tex then told me to go check for other people in the house. I walked down a hall and past a room where a woman wearing glasses was reading a book. I waved at her, smiled, and kept going. The woman, Abigail Folger, heiress to the Folger coffee fortune, smiled and waved back. I continued on down the hall and came to another room. A very pretty, pregnant woman was in bed, and a man was sitting on the bed. They were talking. They turned out to be Sharon Tate, the actress and wife of movie producer Roman Polanski, and Jay Sebring, an internationally known hairstylist. I was to learn later that this was the home of the beautiful Miss Tate and Polanski, who was out of the country at the time. A noted movie man, Polanski had produced the controversial Rosemary's Baby, a film about a woman who bore a child by Satan. Miss Tate and her visitor continued to talk, apparently not seeing me. I found no one else in the house. Walking back toward the living room, I waved at the Folger woman again and reported to Tex. "All right," he said. "Take your knife and go bring them in here." So once again, I walked back down the hall to the far bedroom where the man and woman were talking. Only this time I burst into the room with my knife thrust out in front of me. I surprised them, and they seemed rattled. "Come with me," I said evenly. "Don't say a word, or you're dead." Walking behind, I herded them down the hall, and taking them into the Folger woman's bedroom, I ordered her to follow. And surprisingly, she came too, saying nothing. I held the knife menacingly in my right hand, although I write with my left, and my costume and bold manner obviously intimidated them. In the living room, Tex told all of them to line up in front of the fireplace. At that, Sharon Tate started crying. "Shut up," Tex shouted. Sebring looked hard at Tex. "Can't you see she's pregnant?" She was very pregnant, and with the bikini panties and flimsy top she was wearing, it showed plainly. Sebring stepped toward Tex and started to reach for him. Tex turned the gun and shot him twice. He fell over in front of the fireplace, apparently dead or dying. The Tate woman screamed, but then quieted into sobbing and weeping. Tex told Pat to turn down the lights. He continued talking. "Where's your money?" The Folger woman spoke first. "I have some credit cards." I moved swiftly and grabbed her, holding my knife to the abdomen. I walked her to her bedroom. "Please don't hurt me," she sobbed. "You can have everything." I spoke fiercely to her. Tex took her wallet. It had $70 in it. "Is this all you have?" Tex demanded. "Yes," she sobbed. Tex's stony eyes passed from one to another. "Prepare to die." Tex took the rope he had brought and tied it around the necks of all three. He threw the end over one of the living room beams and pulled it tight, forcing each of them to stand erect or choke. Tex, looking vicious and cruel, yet blank and pale, turned to me. "Kill him." He motioned toward Frykowski. I raised my knife to plunge it into his chest, but my hand would not come down. I tried to swing the knife down, but my hand wouldn't move. The seconds flashed by. I yelled. Tex, I can't do it. Suddenly, Frykowski, still tied about the neck, but free of the towel around his hands, grabbed me, and we began to struggle. Apparently, the rope over the beam pulled loose, and we fell to the floor, rolling and twisting. I was fighting wildly, but was aware that Pat and the Folger woman had begun to struggle also. There were screams, yells, curses, wrestling, stabbing, and kicking as a desperate fight for life was waged in that luxurious house of horror in the hills of Bel Air. It was total chaos. Frykowski grabbed me by the hair and pulled desperately, violently, literally tearing it out by the roots. He had me from behind, and I flailed wildly with my knife, stabbing him over and over in the legs. Blood was everywhere. Strangely, right in the middle of the battle for life, Linda came into the house, obviously terrified, horror-stricken. "Do something!" she screamed. "Sadie, can't you stop it?" Still struggling, I somehow managed to converse with her. "No, I can't do anything," I yelled. And above everything, I could hear Sharon Tate, crying, sobbing. The fighting with Frykowski probably lasted only 30 seconds, but it seemed like an eternity, until Tex jumped in and began to battle Frykowski too. He hit him over the head several times with the gun. I heard the crack of bone, Frykowski's skull. I thought he was surely dead. But he struggled on and finally broke free, running out of the house and onto the lawn, screaming. Just then, Linda came back in. "Give me your knife," I yelled. "I've lost mine." Apparently, Linda did give her knife, for I soon had another one. My own turned out to have fallen between cushions on the couch and was to be found by the police the next day. Folger, Tex, and Pat all ran out onto the lawn after Frykowski, and it was there that the bodies of Miss Folger and her lover, Frykowski, ended up, unbelievably battered and punctured. As they raced and clawed their way out of the living room, my burning mind recorded a scene I'd never forget. It was a picture of my good friend Tex, a gun in one hand and a knife in the other, both arms extended, and a terrible mixture of scream and laughter coming out of his wide-stretched mouth. He was 4 feet off the floor, suspended in the air, a man possessed, driven. Even in that second, I recalled the unusual words of Linda one night after she had made love to Tex. "I feel like I'm possessed." In that flash, I knew Tex was not a human being. He was another creature. Suddenly, I was alone in the house with Miss Tate and Sebring's body. The bedlam had turned to silence. It was so quiet that I could hear the gurgle of Sebring's blood. Miss Tate had fallen on the couch and continued to weep. I turned to her. "Shut up, bitch. You're going to die." Immediately, Tex was back in the room. "Kill her," he said. I grabbed her and held the knife to her, but that's as far as I could go. I can't, Tex. Kill her, he yelled. I can't, he snarled. Get out of the way, then. He plunged the knife into her. Once again, it was very quiet. Everyone was dead. I could distinctly hear the sounds of death. In that quietness, I wondered why no one had heard the awful noises coming from the house. The gunshots, the screams. There was no explanation except one later given by the prosecuting attorney. The canyons play tricks with sounds, sometimes causing a soft sound to be heard distinctly a quarter-mile away, while other loud sounds aren't heard a few yards away, even as close as the guest house where young Garretson was alone. The three of us, Linda was gone again, looked quickly around the room. It was a shambles, and the blood was spattered everywhere. Little was said, and we left through the front door. We were almost to the gate when Tex said, "Did anybody write anything on the door?" "No, I forgot," I said. We had determined to leave a message that would hopefully establish a pattern that would recall the Hinman case and cause the police to suspect revolutionaries, probably black, and thus lead them to release Bobby. I went back to the house alone. Inside, I saw Sharon Tate on the floor. Blood was all around her. I knew I shouldn't use my fingers because of the possibility of prints, so I settled on the towel we had used on Frykowski. I knelt beside Miss Tate and dipped the end of the towel into her blood. It was still warm. My mind began to race madly. I thought of her baby. I had a strong urge to remove the baby, to save it. But I knew that was impossible. Then I pictured myself tasting her blood. I nearly threw up at the thought, and a wave of disgust swept over me for even having the idea. I found myself looking at the woman. She was very pretty. I took the blood-dipped towel and went to the front door. On the bottom section, I wrote the word pig. Then I threw the towel back into the room and left. To get out of the door, I had to step in blood with one foot. So I hopped on the other foot down to the grass and wiped my bare foot back and forth several times. I joined the others at the fence, and we climbed over and walked quickly and silently down the hill to the car. Linda was sitting behind the steering wheel. Tex told her to get out of the way, and he got in behind the wheel. I climbed into the back seat. All of us were angry at Linda for having left us. She remained silent as we changed our clothes and drove away. I had a lot of blood on my clothes. My head was aching terribly, and I reached my hand up to it. A large clutch of hair came away. Frykowski had battled with all of his might. There was little talking as we drove. We made several stops at embankments to throw away our soiled clothes and weapons. When I realized I didn't have my knife, we talked it over and decided it was not worth the risk to go back and look for it. Somewhere along the way, we stopped at a house on a side street where we spotted a garden hose. We washed our hands with it until a man came out of the house and yelled at us, "What are you doing?" Tex told him we had just stopped for a drink of water. But the man persisted and reached into the car to try to grab the keys. Tex hit him, and we sped away. Back at Spawn's ranch, we drove up to the boardwalk where we were met by Charlie and Clem. Tex told them we'd have to clean the blood off the car. Around the door handles and the steering wheel primarily. We went into the bunkhouse, and Tex began to tell Charlie about the night. I couldn't hear everything they were saying, but I did hear Charlie ask, "Did you go to the next house?" "No," Tex said. Charlie became agitated. It was obvious he was angry. "Man," he said sharply, "I told you to go to every house on that street. Now we'll have to go back." Tex was also angry, but I couldn't hear everything he said. I heard a phrase, something like, "It was crazy. Everything went wild." I couldn't believe my ears. What does Charlie want? Dragging myself into the next room, I fell on the bed, exhausted. I felt as though I, too, were dead. I wasn't alive anymore. The next day, I learned the identities of the people we had killed. Business was going along as usual at the ranch, but I decided to go into the house trailer parked alongside one of the buildings to watch the news on the television set there. The show contained little less but the account of the Sharon Tate murders. I ran to get Pat and Linda. As we watched, someone said, I believe I was the one, "The Soul really knew what he was doing this time." The Soul was one of Charlie's many nicknames. I have no explanation for how hardened I had become in only a few hours. As I watched the TV reporters, I even laughed as they described the details of the horror. That night, Charlie came up to me again. "Come on, we're going out again." I knew he meant there would be more killing, and I was immediately afraid. But I was obedient. Charlie, Tex, Linda, Pat, Leslie, Clem, and I drove off in the old Ford. Charlie was behind the wheel, and he drove and drove, covering many miles, but I wasn't sure where we were most of the time. There was little conversation, but at least about where we were going or what we were going to do. It was mostly light talk. I'm not sure about the others, but I was once again quite stoned on methadone and was pretty much preoccupied with my own thoughts. At one point, Charlie stopped in front of a large church. "I'm going to kill a priest and hang him upside down on the cross," he said, nonchalantly. No one said anything. In a few minutes, he was back. Nobody was there. We also stopped in a residential district, and Charlie got out and headed for a house. He returned soon, saying he had seen pictures of children on the walls through a window and didn't want to harm the little children by killing their parents. Again, we drove away and continued for many miles, eventually coming to a stop in front of a house on Waverly Drive in Hollywood, not far from Griffith Park. I recognized the house. We had known a guy who had lived there, and some of us had been to one of his parties. Charlie got out once more, but he didn't go to the house we knew. He went next door. He was gone for a considerable time, although none of us was keeping track of time. Charlie walked rather casually up to the car and motioned Tex outside. They talked for several moments, and then Charlie told Pat and Leslie to go inside the house with Tex. I know nothing firsthand about what happened in the house, which was the residence of Lino and Rosemary LaBianca. I know that Charlie had somehow got control of the LaBiancas and tied them together in the living room. Apparently, when the girls arrived, they took Mrs. LaBianca into the bedroom, where, according to police reports, her body was found full of stab wounds, with a pillowcase around the head and a lamp cord wrapped around the neck. Mr. LaBianca's body was found in the living room, with a pillowcase and a throw pillow over the head and a lamp cord wrapped tightly around the neck. The body contained multiple stab wounds, and a carving fork had been left protruding from the stomach. The word war had been carved into the abdomen. Writing in blood had been left in 3 places. High on one living room wall were the words, "Death to pigs." On the opposite wall was the word "Rise." And finally, on the refrigerator door in the kitchen were the words "Helter Skelter," with the word "Helter" misspelled. In the car, meanwhile, Charlie, Clem, Linda, and I drove around some more. Charlie showed us the woman's wallet he had taken from the LaBianca house. He said he wanted to plant it somewhere in a black neighborhood to try to mislead the police. He finally drove into the parking area of a service station and told Linda to hide it in the ladies' room, which she did, putting it in the water tank, where it wasn't found for a long time. Charlie's efforts to arouse suspicions among the blacks failed, since the service station turned out to be white-operated and situated only on the fringe of a black neighborhood. When Linda returned, Charlie asked her, "Do you know anyone we ought to kill?" Linda, apparently trying to keep herself in Charlie's good graces, replied that there was someone in Venice she'd like to see dead. So Charlie drove to Venice. Dawn was approaching when Linda, Clem, and I got out of the car and went into an apartment complex. Linda led us to a door and knocked. No one answered, so we left. I later found out that she had chickened out and purposely led us to the wrong apartment. When we got back down the street, Charlie was gone. We soon realized that he had left us, so we decided to hitchhike back to Spawn Ranch. First, we buried a gun Clem was carrying, and then, with several rides, arrived at the ranch in daylight. Meanwhile, Tex, Pat, and Leslie had also been left to hitchhike back from the LaBianca home. It was a weird thought. A gang of killers hitchhiking home from the scene of their crimes. The killing did not end with the Tate LaBianca murders. A ranch hand at Spawn's, Donald Shea, an aspiring actor whom we called Shorty, died shortly after the 2 nights of savagery. Shorty apparently was thought to have known too much about the killings, having overheard a lot of our conversations. I have no direct information regarding his death, but it was believed and widely reported that he had been dismembered and buried near the ranch. His body was never found.